Hi everybody. I'm going to delve right into our Triple Play Thursday, and I'm going to read 3 pages, the first 3 pages of 3 different genres of novels for you today. And I'm going to start with Brenda Novak's The Bookstore on the Beach. This is a romance novel. How do you start a new chapter of your life when you haven't closed the book on the previous one? 18 months ago, Autumn Divak's husband went missing. Her desperate search has yielded no answers, and she can't imagine moving forward without him. But for the sake of their 2 teenage children, she has to try. Autumn takes her kids home for the summer to the charming beachside town where she was raised. She seeks comfort working alongside her mother and aunt at their bookshop, only to learn that her daughter is facing a huge life change and her mother has been hiding a terrible secret for years. And when she runs into the boy who stole her heart in high school, old feelings start to bubble up again. Is she free to love him, or should she hold out hope for her husband's return? She can only trust her heart and hope it won't lead her astray. Bookstore on the Beach. Today, her daughter was returning for the summer. Mary Langford gazed eagerly out at the street in front of her small bookstore, looking for a glimpse of Autumn's car, and when she saw nothing except a large family going into an ice cream parlor at the end of the block, checked her watch. 3:30. Autumn had called at lunchtime to say that she and the kids were making good time. They probably wouldn't be much longer. "You've been quiet today," Lori commented from where she sat behind the counter, straightening the pens, tape, stapler, and bookmarks. Mary turned from the large front window she'd recently decorated with posters of the hottest new releases. "I worry when she's on the road for so long." "She'll make it, and it'll be great to see her and the kids. They haven't been back since Christmas, have they?" "No." She picked up the feather duster and began cleaning shelves, a never-ending job at Beachfront Books, which she and Lori owned as 50-50 partners. Autumn lived in Tampa, Florida, far enough away that it wasn't easy to get together when Taylor and Caden were in school. And I doubt they'll come back for the holidays this year. Fortunately, they were more consistent about returning for the summer, except for last summer, of course, which was understandable. Mary hoped she'd be able to count on that continuing, but with the kids getting older, nothing was certain. Taylor had only 1 more year of high school before heading off to college. Caden had 2. Mary feared this might be the last time. For a while, they'd all be together in Sable Beach. "You could visit them," Lori pointed out. Autumn had invited her many times. Remembering the arguments her refusal had sparked over the years caused Mary's stomach to churn. She wanted to go to Tampa, wanted to make it so that her daughter wouldn't have to do all the traveling. Autumn had been going through so much lately, but the thought of venturing into unfamiliar territory filled Mary with dread. Other than go to Richmond occasionally, which was the closest big city, she hadn't left the sleepy Virginia beach town she called home in 35 years. "Yes, but you know me. This is the only place I feel safe." Lori rocked back on the tall stool. "Well, if the fear hasn't gone away by now, I guess it's not going to." "No, I don't talk about it anymore, but the past is as real to me now as it's ever been." Although the store had been busy earlier, what with the influx of tourists for the season, foot traffic had slowed. When that happened, they often talked more than they worked. Beachfront Books wasn't Lori's sole source of income. Her husband, Christopher Conklin, was a talented artist. He painted all kinds of seascapes, and while he wasn't in any prestigious galleries, he sold his paintings in a section they reserved for him in the store as well as online. But Mary, who'd never been married, had no other support. Beachfront Books didn't make a large profit, but no one loved the escape that books provided more than she did, and the store garnered enough business that she could eke out a living. That was all that mattered to her. "Autumn gets so mad that I won't go out and see the world, visit, travel, that sort of thing," she murmured, wishing she didn't have the scars and limitations that had, at times, put such a strain on their relationship. "She keeps saying I'm too young to live like an old lady." "She has a point." Mary sighed. "I'm not young anymore." What are you talking about? You're 9 years younger than me. 54 is not old. That was true, but she'd grown up far sooner than most people. I feel ancient. Next year, you should go to Tampa if they ask you. She shook her head. I can't. Maybe you'll prove that you can. Mary couldn't help bristling. She didn't like it when Lori pushed her. No. Autumn doesn't understand, Mary. That's what causes almost every fight you have with her. I know, and I feel bad about that, but there's nothing I can do. Lori lowered her voice. You could tell her the truth. Absolutely not, Mary snapped. Why would I ever do that? There are reasons, and you know it. We've talked about this before, Lori said, remaining calm as always. That was one of the things Mary liked about her. She was steady and patient, and that steadiness somehow helped Mary cope when old feelings and memories began to resurface. Brenda Novak's The Bookstore on the Beach, and it's a romance. The next one is called In an Instant. It's by Suzanne Redfern, and this is a psychological thriller. One moment, 11 lives altered, and a truth only she can see. Life is over in an instant for 16-year-old Finn Miller when a devastating car accident tumbles her and 10 others over the side of a mountain. Suspended between worlds, she watches helplessly as those she loves struggle to survive. Prologue. Mrs. Kaminsky knew before it happened. Until that day, we thought she was a psycho mom, neurotic and paranoid. Behind her back, we called her the warden and felt bad for Mo for having to deal with such a phobic, obsessive mother. Sheltered was an understatement for the way Mrs. Kaminsky guarded her daughter. Birthday parties at the beach or pool were off limits unless a lifeguard was present, and Mrs. Kaminsky was allowed to be there as well. A 40-something shadow lurking on the sand or at the water's edge, hovering watchfully beside the reveling 12-year-olds. Disneyland was out of the question. Though she was a small, quiet woman, barely 5 feet tall, with a kind smile and exceeding politeness, it was hard to believe how unyielding she was about watching over Mo. Secretly, we wondered if something traumatic had happened to Mrs. Kaminsky when she was young that had made her so protective, but Mo said that wasn't it. She said her mom just believed that nobody looked after your children the way you looked after your own. It was a generous view for Mo to take, her patience far greater than any of the rest of us would have had for our moms interfering in our lives the way Mrs. Kaminsky did in Mo's. 6th grade science camp was when her resolve finally softened from granite to steel, slightly more malleable, but not much. Every 6th grader except Mo was going on the trip. The teacher called Mrs. Kaminsky, then the principal, then my mom. It was my mom who convinced her. My dad was going as a chaperone, and he would personally watch after Mo. Perhaps it was because she believed my mom, or maybe it was because she trusted my dad, or perhaps it was because she realized she couldn't hold her iron grip forever, or maybe it was because the camp was so important to that year's curriculum. Whatever the reason, for the first time in Mo's 12 years, she was allowed to leave the nest without her mom at her side. Since then, Mrs. Kaminsky has repeatedly entrusted us with her daughter, each sacred trust prefaced with assurances from my parents of, "We'll take good care of her. She's in good hands. Mo is like a daughter to us." Throwaway platitudes I wonder about endlessly these days, questioning whether those cliched, careless words influenced what happened or whether they were meaningless and that things would have happened the way they did regardless of what had been thoughtlessly promised beforehand. Over the years, I was entrusted to Mrs. Kaminsky as well, but my parents never asked for guarantees of my safekeeping. Mo is an only child, so I was taken along as company on all the Kaminsky vacations. I've been to Africa and Spain and Thailand and Alaska. My parents eagerly agreed to each invitation without the slightest hesitation or demand of reciprocal pledges of protection, like those given when we took Mo. Perhaps it was assumed it went both ways, or maybe, deep down, my parents knew the promise wouldn't be granted, which would have made the decision to allow me to join them awkward. I imagine my parents understood that Mrs. Kaminsky's fears were based on deep-seated self-reflection, that she had considered the possibility of a fault rupturing or a volcano erupting or a ship sinking and knew, faced with the dire choice, she would take care of her own. And though Mo and I were closest sisters, I didn't qualify. From my earliest memories, I can remember my sisters, my friends, and me rolling our eyes whenever Mrs. Kaminsky was mentioned, how we thought she was crazy. No one calls her crazy anymore. She knew before it happened, and I wonder, how? Was it because she was a prophet, a visionary gifted with preternatural premonition, or was it exactly as Mo said, a rational, well-considered protective stance based on the simple understanding that no one watches over yours the way you watch out for your own, knowing hers would be saved second if a choice needed to be made? These are the things I wonder now, after. In an Instant, Suzanne Redfern, and this is a psychological thriller. And the last fiction fragment for adults I'm going to read is called 20. It's by James Grippando, and this is a mystery. After a deadly school shooting claims 20 casualties, Florida's fifth mass shooting in as many years, Jack Switek and his family are caught in the crossfire in this provocative and timely thriller from Harper Lee's Prize for Legal Fiction winner James Grippando that touches on some of the most contentious issues roiling America today. Chapter 1. Everything I learned I've forgotten since kindergarten, said Jack. He was behind the wheel of the family SUV with his wife Andy beside him. Their daughter was behind Andy, strapped into her car seat, her curious expression lighting up Jack's rearview mirror. What does that mean, Daddy? Oh, there was this book some time ago. It was called, actually, said Andy, it was called Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. So I think what your daddy is saying is that he needs to go back to kindergarten. You mean he wants a do-over? Asked Riley. Jack smiled. Yes, honey, Daddy wants a do-over. No do-overs, that's our rule. Jack was the assistant coach of Riley's Pee Wee soccer team. You're right, honey, that is the rule. Had a do-over been possible, Jack would have chosen Riverside Day School for his own education. Seated on 10 picturesque acres of green space in one of the oldest neighborhoods along the Miami River, Riverside was South Florida's premier K-12 private academy. 90% of the faculty had a postgraduate degree. No teacher had more than 18 students, and every classroom had the latest smartboard technology. The parent directory read like a who's who of Florida business leaders, which left Jack and Andy in the proverbial no man's land on the financial spectrum, too rich for financial aid and not nearly rich enough to afford the tuition. So they stretched, remaining conspicuously silent when other parents waxed on about their ski trips over winter break or summers in the south of France. Park right there, said Andy, pointing to an open space on the street. They were still more than 2 blocks from the campus entrance, just outside the blinking amber lights of the designated school zone. The school had a parking lot, but Jack understood the issue. Andy was an FBI agent, and although she was dressed for a day of field work, she was not yet on duty, and Florida law prohibited law enforcement officers from carrying weapons onto school zones if they were off duty. Jack parked the car and unloaded Riley from the back seat, while Andy discreetly locked her sidearm and holster in the glove compartment. It was mid-September, a Wednesday morning, the final week during which kindergarten parents were allowed to walk their children to the classroom. Hand in hand, they entered the campus and went to the flagpole on the quad, where the elementary level students assembled every morning in a circle, placed their hands over their hearts, and recited the Pledge of Allegiance, or some reasonable facsimile thereof. And to the Republic for Richard stands. One day Jack wanted to meet this Richard Stands. Jack's law office was within walking distance. It's a historical coral stone house that, like most residencies in this gentrified circa 1920s neighborhood, had been refurbished and converted to commercial use. He gave Andy the car keys and a kiss, hugged Riley, and headed off beneath the sprawling limbs of century-old live oaks. It was a perfect morning, still hours away from the heat and humidity that would return every afternoon until about Halloween, a wet blanket of a reminder that there really was no such thing as autumn in the subtropics. It made Jack think of the walks he would like to have taken with his father when he was in kindergarten, when a young Representative Harry Switek was away in Tallahassee for legislative sessions and Jack's stepmother was too hungover to get out of bed. Jack enjoyed his walk along the river, thanking his lucky stars for the life he and Andy had made for themselves and their only child. The mother-daughter goodbye at the classroom door was without tears, at least not from Riley. Andy's commute to the FBI's field office in North Miami was by way of the dreaded Palmetto Expressway, a miles-long, bumper-to-bumper nightmare of blinking red taillights, the thought of which made her downright envious of Jack's lovely walk from the school to his office. Deciding to let rush hour traffic subside before getting on the road, Andy joined the other parents in the recreation center for the regular second Wednesday of the month coffee with the head of school. It was Andy's first, but it wasn't limited to new parents, so it was mostly the usual suspects. Working mothers dressed for the office in one cluster, stay-at-home mothers in workout spandex or tennis skirts in another. Off to the side, alone, stood a tech world multimillionaire who had sold his company and retired way too young, not really sure how he fit into this overwhelmingly female group. Andy felt almost as out of place, dressed in law enforcement khaki pants and black tactical boots, which made her look more like the head janitor than a Riverside parent. She was relieved to find her friend Molly near the basket of bagels. "Glad to see you here," said Andy. James Grapondo's 20, and this is a mystery. And that's all I have for you for the fiction fragments for our Triple Play Thursday. I hope that you found something you like. These books are at the library, so come on down and check them out. Have a great day. Bye.